No one heard her scream. No one reported her missing. And when she vanished, the town accepted the explanation without question. But years later, something was discovered beneath the floor of an old country house, and it revealed that an entire town had chosen silence over truth. This is the story of Lydia Whitmore and what really happened inside Willowbrook House. The town of Greyhaven was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to change. A single main road cut through its center like a scar that never healed or widened. One general store stocked with the same dusty goods year after year. A small church with chipped stone steps and a bell that rang every Sunday, whether people showed up or not. Everyone knew everyone, or at least believed they did, and secrets had a way of staying hidden, not because they were well kept, but because no one wanted to ask the wrong questions. In Greyhaven, people minded their business. That was especially true when it came to Willowbrook House. The property sat just far enough away from town to feel separate from it, surrounded by old willow trees whose branches drooped low, brushing the ground like tired arms. The road leading to the house narrowed as it approached, as though it didn't want visitors either. Locals said the house had been built decades earlier by a wealthy family who left suddenly under strange circumstances. Some claimed illness, others claimed scandal. No one ever seemed to agree on the details, only that the house had never brought good fortune to anyone who lived there for too long. Over the years, families came and went. Some stayed months, others only weeks. A few left in the middle of the night without explanation. Then, in the spring of 1912, Edgar Whitmore arrived. Edgar Whitmore was a man who spoke softly and smiled rarely. He had a calm voice that never rose even when he was angry, which somehow made it more unsettling. He arrived with his second wife, Margaret, and his daughter from a previous marriage, Lydia Whitmore, who was just 12 years old. From the beginning, the Whitmores stood out. Margaret was polite but distant. She kept her eyes lowered when speaking, as if worried she might say the wrong thing. Her hands often trembled slightly when she reached for coins or papers. She dressed neatly, but her clothes were always a little too plain, a little too worn. Edgar, on the other hand, carried himself with authority. He spoke to shopkeepers and town officials with calm confidence. He paid in cash. He asked no questions, and he made it clear he valued privacy above all else. The townspeople noticed something else almost immediately. Lydia rarely spoke. She was small for her age, with dark hair usually tied back with a faded ribbon. When spoken to, she nodded instead of answering. When asked questions, she glanced toward her father before responding, if she responded at all. At church, she sat perfectly still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. At the general store, she stood close to Margaret, never wandering the aisles like other children. Some people found her behavior odd. Others found it unsettling, but no one said anything. After all, this was Greyhaven. Life inside Willowbrook House remained mostly invisible to the outside world. The Whitmores kept to themselves. Curtains were drawn even during the day. The windows were rarely opened even in warm weather. Visitors were uncommon, and when they did appear, delivery men, distant acquaintances, they never stayed long. Margaret did most of the household work. Lydia helped quietly, scrubbing floors, carrying water, folding linens. She moved carefully through the house, as if trying not to be noticed. At night, neighbors occasionally noticed lights on in strange parts of the house at odd hours. Once, a farmer passing by late claimed he heard shouting from inside, a man's voice, sharp and controlled, followed by silence. The next morning, everything appeared normal. Lydia attended school sporadically. Some weeks she appeared every day. Other weeks she vanished entirely. When teachers asked Edgar about her absences, he blamed illness. He said she was frail, sensitive, not suited for regular schooling. The explanation was accepted. But children notice things adults pretend not to. Some of Lydia's classmates noticed bruises, a dark mark on her wrist, half hidden beneath her sleeve, a yellowing discoloration along her neck, thin scratches on her arms. When asked, Lydia claimed she fell or bumped into furniture or tripped on the steps. Her answers were always quiet, always rehearsed. No reports were made. In 1912, there were no social workers, no mandatory reporting, no anonymous tips, no systems designed to protect children when adults chose not to see. And Lydia Whitmore learned early that silence was safer than honesty. As months passed, her behavior grew more withdrawn. She flinched at sudden sounds. She stared at the floor when spoken to. Once, during a school reading lesson, she froze halfway through a sentence and began shaking, unable to continue. The teacher sent her home. That was the last time Lydia was seen at school. The final confirmed sighting of Lydia Whitmore occurred on October 17, 1912. She was seen walking home from the general store carrying a small paper bag. Inside were sewing needles and thread. Margaret had sent her to buy them earlier that afternoon. The shopkeeper later recalled that Lydia seemed distracted, nervous. She kept glancing toward the road as though someone was following her. When offered a sweet, Lydia declined. She said she needed to get home. That evening, a neighbor noticed the Whitmore house unusually quiet. No lights visible through the windows, no movement at all. When Lydia failed to return to school the next day, no one was surprised. Or the next, or the one after that. It wasn't until nearly 2 weeks later that a neighbor finally asked about her. Edgar Whitmore's answer was simple. "She's been sent away," he said calmly, "to stay with relatives for her health." Margaret stood behind him, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. No one questioned the story. But weeks passed, then months, and Lydia never returned. Rumors began quietly. Some said she had been sent to a boarding school. Others believed she had run away. A few whispered darker possibilities, but those voices were dismissed quickly. After all, Edgar Whitmore was respected, well-spoken, generous when it suited him. He donated to the church, he paid his debts promptly, and Greyhaven preferred comforting lies over unsettling truths. Over time, Margaret Whitmore began to change. She stopped attending church regularly. When she did appear, she looked thinner, paler. Her eyes seemed constantly rimmed with red, as though she hadn't slept. She flinched when spoken to unexpectedly. She rarely stayed long in public. One afternoon, a shopkeeper noticed her hands shaking so badly she dropped her coins on the counter. She apologized repeatedly, her voice barely audible. One winter evening, Margaret was found sitting alone on the church steps after service, crying softly. When approached, she wiped her face and insisted she was fine. But she wasn't. Margaret knew what had happened to Lydia, and the guilt was slowly consuming her. In early 1914, Margaret wrote a letter. It was addressed to her sister in another town. In it, she described life at Willowbrook. She wrote about fear, about control, about a child who wouldn't stop crying, about a man who lost his temper too easily. She wrote that she was afraid to sleep. The letter was never mailed. It was later found hidden between floorboards in the master bedroom. By the summer of 1914, Edgar announced he was leaving Greyhaven. He claimed business opportunities elsewhere. He sold Willowbrook House quickly, accepting far less than it was worth. Within days, he and Margaret were gone. No forwarding address was left. The house stood empty again. Nearly a year later, renovations began under new ownership. During the removal of old floorboards in a storage room near the back of the house, workers uncovered a shallow space beneath the floor. Inside were fragments of cloth, a ribbon, and bones. The work stopped immediately. Authorities were called. The remains belonged to a young girl, approximately 12 to 13 years old. There was no doubt. They were Lydia Whitmore's. By the time investigators attempted to locate Edgar and Margaret, Edgar was vanished without a trace. Margaret